All right, I think we can start. So, welcome everyone. Welcome to Bhumi webinar series. This is the fourth webinar that Bhumi has been is hosting. Uh, so, I think we have a couple of more people joining in. Yeah. So today's topic for the webinar is uh, dialogue on Fukuoka's writings, the kind of relevance of the book that he wrote, One Straw Revolution, in today's times. And we have Abhishek Thakur with us, who is the co-founder of Blue Ribbon Movement, Bhumi Senior Fellow, and somebody who's also kind of um, been deeply involved in social change initiatives and activities in the country for the past probably decade and a half. So welcome Abhishek, and without wasting any more time, I know you are a person who likes hard stops. So I think we're going to end this at 4:30. So hand it over to you.
Thank you, Adil. Thanks a lot. Hello, everybody. Namaste. Good to see everyone here and so many of us here. So hoping for a fruitful hour and a half. Just waiting for the presentations to come in. Adil, will you be able to do it or should I? Load the presentation, Adil? I guess it's time for us to use for silence till Adil loads the presentation. Awesome. We have the presentation. Yeah.
You want me to go next to the next slide, Abhishek? Let me know.
So I think we can pause on this right now, and I'll let you know, Adil, whenever we look at the next slide. So welcome to Exploring One Straw Revolution. It's a great chance for me to talk a bit about a book that has influenced me a lot. And it's interesting, this book is about farming, and in a way it is about an approach to farming. But really, it's also about an approach to life. It is not just about farming, it is about much more than that. And I think what I have learned over time is that when you go very deep into one subject, what you learn about that subject can get applied to several other domains also. And this is one book that has gone so deep into farming. Fukuoka's work into farming has gone so deep that it lets us look at a whole range of other domains also from this lens. So what we'll be doing today is I'll be reading some passages from the book, and from there on we'll open this up for some reflection, some conversation, maybe some audio, some chat, and so on. So yeah, so Adil, you could go next to the next slide. Okay, so what's our check-in? Let's see what's our check-in there. Just a second. So so let's do a check-in. Sorry, Adil. Yeah. So name and a line about you in the chat box. How are you feeling right now, and what brings you to this webinar? So ideally, people can do this on the chat box so that we can see everybody on the chat. Also, a couple of people are welcome. You're welcome to also, if some of you who feel the energy to talk today afternoon, who are still like perky and not in an afternoon slumber zone, maybe 2-3 of you can also grab the mic meanwhile, unmute yourselves and share. So these are the 3 questions. So we just check in with who's into the room. So I can begin. So my name is Abhishek, as Adil already introduced, co-founder of Blue Ribbon. I also facilitate learning journeys for organizations, so around leadership development. what brings me here is really my love for One Straw Revolution, Fukuoka's work, for some of his ideas, and just a chance to share them. And also my connection to Bhumi, which is part of like a family. I mean, in the part of that family, and I'm feeling very positive, alive right now. Also, a little anxious about the internet, hoping that the internet works out. So that's me. Going to invite a few others to maybe few others to share, and some others, the rest on the chat. If you could just share on the chat how that looks like for you. So maybe some on chat, some on unmute yourself, and you could just check in.
Abhishek, I can check in on audio.
Sure.
This is Sanchi. Hi.
Hi, Sanchi.
Hi. मेरा नाम Sanchi है. I'm Sanchi, and I'm feeling quite awake and curious. And what brings me to this circle is definitely faith in Fukuoka's faith in the practice that he did in farming. So I think it's my faith that has got me here, and of course friends here for hosting this. So yes, friends and Fukuoka's faith. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sanchi. Okay, thanks, Jitin. Anish, thanks. Yeah. Also share your reasons. Yeah. So, okay, Anil, thanks. Hello, Nitesh. Okay, wait for some others, a few others maybe. Okay, Isha, hi. Andrea, hello. Ankita, so lots of curiosity around around this, and a nice range of us coming from different places. Hi, Rakesh. Hello, Aarti. Some familiar faces and friends here. Good to see friends. Well, okay, Lavi, so getting a feel of the crowd, I think a lot of us are in a similar kind of social sector world, and a mix of people who do farming and other stuff. So that sounds great. Anyway, thank you. And you can keep typing in. Adil, we can go to the next slide. Kind of still an extended check-in only. So any intentions for the webinar? This kind of continuing the check-in. You can annotate the screen, and you can write down whatever intentions you have. If you're seeking something like a deeper understanding, or if you're seeking some clarification, if you're seeking expression, sharing, seeking community. So you can just annotate your screen, and maybe write out some of your intentions if you have. So chat or annotate, both are options. And maybe voice also. I mean, maybe one or two more voices. Adil, do you want to check in, since you are the easiest one to cold call?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out Zoom. So. Okay. I think intention for the webinar is just to get a deeper understanding of Fukuoka's philosophy for me. I think more than food and farming, I'm sure that is part of it. I think I'm looking at more the idea of how do we see work? How do we see life? How do we see leisure? How do we see connection with things around us, people around us, nature? So I think more from the philosophy of it. I think my intention is to understand that.
Okay, awesome. That sounds good. Any intentions? Are people happy to kind of annotate and write down any intentions also, or should we just look at the chat intentions as intentions? Ginger, I hear you. Heard your sharing there. Hopefully, it'll be a good session. Okay, Siddharth, thanks. Are there also some people in the waiting room? You'll have to clear them.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm guessing there's nobody who's annotating to write on the intention board. I'm going to forward that one. Then in that case, but yeah, keep typing the intentions in your chat as well. It'd be good to know intentions. Intentions are the seeds. Let's go to the next one. Just wanted to get a sense of in the room, what's kind of how much do we know about Fukuoka and his work? 0, completely clueless, and 5, meaning that I'm like, deep. I could have run this webinar better, kind of way, but or this webinar is meant for me, kind of a thing. So can we see a number? Yeah. Okay, 0, 1. Okay, Adil, thank you. 5. Over to Adil for the rest. Okay, 2, 0. Okay, so we got a lot of zeros. Okay, some others, can you see numbers? Okay, 1, 3, 2, 4. Okay, Gayatri is on 4. That's 9. Okay, lovely. So I think that gives me a sense. I think there's a lot of us who are closer to 0 and closer to 0 and 1. And these scores are for how, Siddharth, these scores are for how familiar you are with Fukuoka's work. So it's really looking at how much do you know his work and so on. So I'm seeing several 0s and 1s. So I'll also accordingly modify what I'm seeing. Sure. So yeah, so I think we've got lots of, we've got several 0s and 1s and 2s and 3s. So, so good to know. Fukuoka, Japanese farmer, born early in the century, lived to the ripe age of mid-90s. 2008 was when he passed away. And starting 1970s, he started sharing an approach to agriculture that he developed through trial and error over a lot of time, called natural farming. Yeah, his work kind of inspired a lot of others to also farm. And what we're going to go today much deeper, as Adil shared, is into the philosophy aspect of Fukuoka, not so much into the farming aspect. So there's not such a hands-on do-it-yourself farming class as much as it's a more reflective class to open up this perspective. So yeah, so we can go on to the next slide, Adil. Okay, so plan for the session is not one webinar revolution. So what we'll be doing today is we'll be starting with introductions, and which we've already done and intend. I'm going to talk a little bit about the book and about my journey with the book. We'll do some readings and breakout groups. So I'll read certain passages and we'll break out into groups to talk. We may also, if time permits, do some spontaneous readings, which is like really go blank and see what comes up. And sometimes it's fun to see what happens when you've not pre-planned something, and then what does the group intend to be birthed. I think that's what it is. And those of you who have the book with you it'll help if you also get the book. It'll help if you have the book with you right now. So that would be good. Adil, you'll have to clear this for yourself. You'll have to clear the annotate option. You'll have to clear the screen as we go forward, unless you want to leave it as it is.
All right, I'll do it.
Yeah, and we can go ahead. Yeah, we can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's about me and the book. Very short. I'm going to keep this very short. So for me, this book came to my life almost 20 years ago now, 19, 20 years ago, when I got in touch with the ecology movement at a much deeper level. And initially, it sounded like a strange book because I have not been into farming. I'm not a farmer. And I'm still not a farmer. So it really felt like there was nothing much for me to, bother about the book. Large parts of the book are about farming, and it is only towards the later part of the book that it goes deeper into the philosophical aspects of life in general. And from farming, Fukuoka goes on to his philosophy in life. That's where it starts getting deeper. And that's what kind of pulled me into it. Over time, I would say this book has influenced me in the way I look at life, the way I look at social change also, the way I look at how we engage in things. So it has been definitely one of those big influences on my life. It's not the or only influence. And for you also, I will invite you to see what lens does this book open up, right? So we'll talk about two parts of this book. First, I'm going to do some readings, which are just opening readings, which give you a sense of Fukuoka, which give you a sense of what he's doing. They are more meant for information, just to give you information about him. And then we'll open up readings which you can use to kind of reflect, and which will open up for dialogue as well. Right? So that's kind of the plan. Also, there are lots of us, I think. So there are about 50 of us. So we are going to have to go into breakouts from time to time. I think that's the only way to make this workable. And those few who have the book, please get the book so that we read together. Okay, so let's go to our introductory quotes. So we're just going to start with basic intro Fukuoka. And Adil, you can go into the next slide, the intro quote. Okay. So this kind of starts with page 1 of the book. It says, "Look at this grain." I believe that a revolution can begin from this one strand of straw. Seen at a glance, this rice straw may appear light and insignificant. Hardly anyone would believe that it would start a revolution. But I've come to realize that the weight and power of this straw, for me, this revolution is very real. He talks about his fields now. Take a look at these fields of rye and barley. This ripening grain will yield about 22 bushels, or 1,300 pounds per quarter acre. I believe this matches the top yields in the Eheim Prefecture. And if this equals the best yield in Eheim Prefecture, it could easily equal the top harvest in the whole country, since this is one of the prime agricultural areas in Japan. And yet, these fields have not been plowed for 25 years. So for 25 years, Fukuoka has not really plowed his fields, and yet he's been able to reach these yields, which are some of the highest yields in the country. And that, I think, is his kind of biggest achievement. He says, "To plant, I simply broadcast rye and barley seed on separate fields in the fall, while the rice is still standing." So while the rice is there, he broadcasts his seeds. A few weeks later, I harvest the rice and spread the rice straw, the mulch, back over the field. That's kind of the heart of his method that he figured out using trial and error, right? And he says, in caring for a quarter-acre field, 1 or 2 people can do all the work of growing rice and winter grain in a matter of few days. So that's kind of the amount of work. So it's almost like through trial and error, he's been able to bring the amount of work required, amount of effort required. I would not say amount of work, because there is still a lot of work, but the amount of effort required to a minimal, right? And we look at how he's able to do this. So Adil, you can go to the next one. Yeah, Adil, next slide. Yeah, sorry. Right. So on page 8, he's talking about a very existential experience that he had. And this is how it reads. One night as I wandered, I collapsed in exhaustion on a hill overlooking the harbor, finally dozing against the trunk of a large tree. I lay there neither asleep nor awake until dawn. I can still remember that it was the morning of 15th of May. In a daze, I watched the harbor grow light, seeing the sunrise and yet somehow not seeing it. As the breeze blew up from below the bluff, the morning mist suddenly disappeared. Just at the moment, a night heron appeared, gave a sharp cry, and flew away into distance. I could hear the flapping of its wings. In an instant, all my doubts and the gloomy mist of my confusion vanished. Everything I had held in firm conviction, everything upon which I had ordinarily relied, was swept away with the wind. I felt that I understood just one thing. Without my thinking about them, words came from my mouth. In this world, there is nothing at all. I felt that I understood nothing. And here, nothing is really understanding the insufficiency of intellectual knowledge. So realizing that intellectual knowledge is nothing. I think that's his spiritual experience that he talks about, that he had at one stage. And this is after he's been employed, and at some stage he's also been farming. So he was first in a job at a plant and then went into farming. So this is his kind of experience. I could see that all the concepts to which I had been clinging, the very notion of existence itself, were empty fabrications. My spirit became light and clear. I was dancing wildly for joy. I could hear the small birds chirping in the trees and see the distant waves glistening in the rising sun. Everything that had possessed me, all the agonies disappeared like dreams and illusions, and something one might call true nature stood revealed. So this I think this experience is not so much like an existentialist philosopher kind of an experience saying life is meaningless, worthless, pointless. It's more, I would kind of put it closer to the kind of experiences Krishnamurti speaks about. They're much more about going beyond the intellect. And this was Krishnamurti's own experience of, this was Fukuoka's own experience of a Krishnamurti style experience, going beyond the intellect, suddenly coming into direct contact with the world and realizing that intellectual concepts are very limited. So that was an experience he had upfront. Adil, you can go to the next one. So we're seeing that he's cultivated a farm which needs no plowing. And we're also seeing that he has been able to do this through a journey where he has had a spiritual experience, and that spiritual experience is about limitations of intellectual knowledge. Adil, next slide. Yeah. So this is from a chapter called Toward a Do Nothing Farming. For 30 years, I lived only in my farming and had little contact with people outside my own community. During those years, I was heading in a straight line towards a do-nothing agricultural method. The usual way to go about developing a method is to ask, how about trying this or how about trying that, bringing in a variety of techniques one upon the other. This is modern agriculture, and it only results in making the farmer busier. So we're talking about each time when we are trying something, we try newer and newer things in farming and how that gets us busier and busier. My way was opposite. I was aiming at a pleasant, natural way of farming, right? And by natural way, he means farming as simply as possible within and in cooperation with the natural environment. So really looking at farming as simply as possible, rather than the modern approach of applying increasingly complex techniques to remake nature entirely for the benefit of human beings. So rather than more complex techniques, really looking at as simple a farming as I could. So my way of farming was opposite. I was aiming at a pleasant, natural way of farming, which results in making the work easier instead of harder. So really trying to reduce the amount of work human beings do and increase the amount of work that is done through nature, right? So how about not doing this? How about not doing that? That was my way of thinking. I ultimately reached the conclusion that there was no need to plow, no need to apply fertilizer, no need to compost, no need to use insecticides. When you get right down to it, there are few agriculture practices that are really necessary. So this is a lot about removing what is unnecessary, and actually instead of adding things, just simplifying and reducing more and more of what's happening. So again, this is kind of some of his ideas around this, and he talks about this whole idea of how doctors and medicine become necessary when people create a sickly environment. So just it's the whole idea that things become necessary because people try, right? Try doing extra hard things. So he's saying the reason that man's improved techniques seem to be necessary is that the natural balance has been so badly upset. It's been upset beforehand by the same techniques that land has become dependent on them. So in trying to introduce new techniques, we kind of upset a certain balance. This line of reasoning not only applies to agriculture, but to other aspects of human society as well. Doctors and medicine become necessary when people create a sickly environment. Formal schooling has no intrinsic value, but becomes necessary when humanity creates a condition in which one must become educated to get along. Right? So the idea that what is natural really, and how moving away from natural creates more and more effort. I think that's kind of the journey that Fukuoka has been taking, going on and on with. So really, these are 2-3 key blocks of his thinking. Adil, we can go on to the next slide. So the 4 principles of natural farming that Fukuoka kind of comes across with, he talks about no cultivation, firstly, so no plowing, no chemical fertilizer or prepared compost, no weeding, not even taking off weeds. So his whole idea is that weeds will also self-regulate, right? His idea of putting the rice mulch on the farm, the weeds will also kind of regulate themselves, is his broad idea, and no dependence on chemicals. Now, this way of natural farming, he arrived at it after a long time of trial and error, right? He kind of figured that he should add clover and these kind of plants work out. And when others tried to apply this, they had to figure out their own thing. And again, Fukuoka says that no 2 years are same, no 2 locations are same. So every location will have to figure out their own way of doing natural farming. The critique he receives from the US farmers is that it doesn't apply into the US, but that's the idea that it shouldn't be written off just because it doesn't directly apply. The idea is each of us has to then figure our own natural. Yeah, I said no plowing. So like I said, the first thing that I spoke about when we spoke about his field, he said that for 25 years, where the book is written, for 25 years, the field was not plowed, right? So it is a no plowing kind of a field. So yeah, so those are kind of principles of natural farming. So this kind of gives you fairly a broad sweeping idea of what Fukuoka's key ideas are. So it is farming without cultivation. It is doing less rather than doing more. And it is also trying to identify what is natural, really looking at what are natural patterns, right? And trying to really understand nature and letting nature do a big chunk of the work, right? So that's kind of Fukuoka. I'm going to pause here for any questions, comments, thoughts into the chat box. We'll not go into talking yet. And once we've taken a few minutes just to see what any questions, or if you're good to go ahead, you can just do a thumbs up. That's also fine. And once we know that everybody is good to go, we'll go into some of these quotes where we'll ask you to kind of reflect on some of this. So we good to see some thumbs up or Just if you guys are cleared about. Okay, so good to go, good to go. We've got a couple of good to go. Okay, so let's go ahead then. Okay, there are some questions, or I think there's a 1+ who has a question. Do you want to type the question, or do you want to, you can also unmute yourself and so I'm going to pass all farming related questions to somebody else who's at 4 or 5, like Gayatri or Adil, on how big, what is the extent to which he could farm. So all farming related questions I'm going to pass away. All I can say is Fukuoka's own kind of way of thinking about it was just a very simple quarter acre plot per person. So his idea was that if you do 1/4 acre for a family of 5, that should feed. Also, I think for farming related challenges, I'm not the best person, not a farmer. Mahesh and or some others can kind of come in, or maybe some others with knowledge of farming can come in, because this is really an open space. So maybe some people who have experimented with some of this could come in. So does anybody want to respond to what Sindhu's saying? Weed control without ploughing is a challenge. Weed control and actually the whole act of leaving weeds into plants itself in the farm itself is quite a radical step. So if somebody wants to talk about anybody who's tried this, and permaculture is also influenced by Fukuoka's work. So if you can elaborate, if somebody who's got a real experience with this, elaborate on that in the chat box, or even unmute yourself and share a bit. I'm gonna wait for that to happen. Anybody who wants to share on Sindhu's point, or Sindhu's question?
Namaste. I would like to add. My name is Ajay.
Yeah, Ajay, sure. Go ahead.
So as Sindhu was mentioning that to control the weed, it's a challenge without plowing. So the idea is to all the weeds, some of the weeds which grows in a farm are actually edible. So if you can actually identify what are the edibles and what are non-edibles, so one thing you get it is you can get it the edible ones. The other thing is mulching is also a good weed controller. But the other thing you can actually implement ground cover. So the grasses like stylo grasses which will help in controlling the weed as well and fixing the nitrogen. It acts as a good ground cover in some of the dry lands. Again, it depends on the location and place. So no weed is waste. Everything is actually useful, and probably if we could identify it, that will be a interesting thing to go on.
Right, and we have a few more responses on the chat also. I think for me, the deeper principle is that there is no one size fits all. You'll have to really look at your own local context and kind of discover for yourself. I think really you'll have to discover, like you said, and Fukuoka at some stage talks about how he arrived at a pattern. He was looking at a pattern of orange trees, and he took him about, he had to cut about 400 trees to figure out, oh, this is kind of the natural pattern. So it takes a while, and it is a lot of trial and error that goes. Aarti will come into what is really natural as a part of our reflection, because it's an open question. What is really natural is kind of, we'll get into that into our breakouts as well. Great. So farming related conversations can continue in the chat room. And like I said, the main intent of this is much more the philosophy of Fukuoka rather than the actual practice of natural farming, for which I'm sure Bhumi will keep another webinar. Okay, great. So let's move to some quotes now where we'll discuss. So there'll be 3 rounds now of quotes that I'm going to read, and I'm going to then ask each of you to kind of share, discuss, reflect what this evokes in you, right? So that's what we're going to look at. What does a certain quote evoke in you? So let's go to deeper reflection. So I've taken just 3 I've taken 6 quotes, two of each. The first one has to do with consumer preferences and how consumer preferences shape our demands. And what I'll do as I read each quote is I'm going to invite you also to listen into the quote, to think about how true is that for you? Do you agree, disagree? What does that kind of bring for you? Right? So we'll do some of that. So this quote reads, consumers' willingness to pay high prices for food produced out of season has also contributed to the increased use of artificial growing methods we demand out of season food. And just one, give me a minute so that I will just find the right place. That's what. Right, the fruit of hard times. Sorry, there was just a little bit of a scuffle in this one. Okay. Consumers generally assume that they have nothing to do with causing agricultural pollution. Many of them ask for food that has not been chemically treated. But chemically treated food is marketed mainly in response to preferences of the consumer. The consumer demands large, shiny, unblemished produce of regular shape. To satisfy these desires, agricultural chemicals which were not used 5 or 6 years ago have come rapidly into use. How did we get into such a predicament? People say they do not care if cucumbers are straight or crooked, and that fruit doesn't necessarily have to be beautiful on the outside. But take a look inside the wholesale markets in Tokyo sometime if you want to see how price responds to consumer preferences. When the fruit looks just a little better, you get a premium of 5 or 10 cents a pound. When the fruit is classified small, medium, or large, the price per pound may double or triple with each increase in size. The consumer's willingness to pay high prices for food produced out of season has also contributed to the increased use of artificial growing methods and chemicals. Last year, the Honshu mandarin oranges grown in hot houses for summer shipment fetched prices 10 or 20 times higher than seasonal mandarin. Instead of the usual price of 10 to 15 cents per pound, outrageous prices of $1, $1.75 to the pound were paid. And so if you invest several $1,000s to install the equipment, buy the necessary fuel and work the extra hours, you can realize a profit. Farming out of season is becoming more and more popular all the time. To have mandarin oranges just 1 month earlier, the people in the city seem to be happy enough to pay for the farmers' extra investment in labor and equipment. But if you ask how important it is for human beings to have this fruit a month earlier, the truth is that it is not important at all. And money is not the only price paid for such indulgence, right? The price of valuing beauty or valuing a certain size. So as you reflect on this quote and the one after that, and we'll go into breakout, as you reflect onto this quote, what I'll invite you to do is think about our love for the look, our love for cosmetic, our love for something out of season, right? So it's just not about food. It goes much deeper than that in how we value the way something looks, how we value having something not in its right time in our lives, but something, you know, our own impatience. And how does the ripple effect of that unfold? I think that's the invitation to look at. Adil, can you look at the next one also? Can you look at the next one? Right, so this is from Simply Serve Nature and All Is Well. So again, a part of his idea of serving nature. So again, this is a critique of desire. Extravagance of desire is the fundamental cause which has led the world into its present predicament. So too much desire is the problem. fast rather than slow, more rather than less. This flashy development is linked directly to society's impending collapse. So this whole flashy development, a certain type of development, it has only served to separate man from nature. Humanity must stop indulging the desire for material possessions and personal gain and move instead towards spiritual awareness. A very Eastern way of looking at this. Agriculture must change from large mechanical operations to small farms attached only to life itself. Material life and diet should be given a simple place. If this is done, work becomes pleasant and spiritual breathing space becomes plentiful. So this is important. If you give material life and diet a simple place, work becomes pleasant and spiritual breathing place becomes plentiful. The more the farmer increases the scale of his operation, the more his body and spirit are dissipated and the further he falls from a spiritually satisfying life. A life of small scale farming may appear to be primitive, but in living such a life, it becomes possible to contemplate the great way. And by the great way, he's saying the path of spiritual awareness, which involves attentiveness and care for daily activities of life. I believe that if one fathoms deeply one's own neighborhood and the everyday world in which he lives, the greatest of worlds will be revealed. So we just open ourselves and go around, a lot of different worlds will come, right? The dwindling of the New Year's holiday indicates how busy the farmer has become and how he has lost his easygoing physical and spiritual well-being. There is no time in the modern agriculture for a farmer to write a poem or compose a song. Right? So just the idea that in pursuit of desire and scale, how both sides get affected. I think that's what the invitation is. So what we'll do is we'll go into small breakouts, and maybe Adil, you can help do these breakouts of about 5 or 6 each. We'll just do about a 10-minute breakout on this particular theme. So just the theme of, we're talking one on the consumer side, how is the consumer demand driving things, and how does out of season stuff actually have an entire ripple effect. And the other side of it, which is how overdose of desire and the pursuit of development takes away time. So not only in farming, but we'll also look at so 2 questions really, what does it evoke in you, and what in your life, how is this showing up? I think that's kind of the invitation. So let's do about 8 to 10 minutes. You will receive a notice and maybe a countdown of a minute when we do these breakaways. So Adil, are we good to do a small breakaway on this one, a small breakout?
Yeah, just give me a couple of minutes. I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah, you don't need to allocate. Just let there be about 6 people per breakout, 5 or 6 people. There are 44 of us. So.
Yes. 8 rooms is okay. We have 43.
Yeah, 8 rooms is good.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
You will all receive an invitation to join the breakout room. Please click on that and then you'll be taken to your room.
Yeah, I've shared the invitation. I think most people would have received.
Yeah, so please accept the breakout room invitation. We'll be back in about 8 minutes from now.
Sorry, Abhi, what are we discussing in the breakout room?
2 things really. One is what do these quotes evoke for you, and in your life, how are these things showing up for you in your life? How are these showing up?
Thank you.
Adil, you can pause the recording, I think. Let's have some responses chat, but also people who wanna voice also. what came up in exploring some of this. It would be good to hear a few voices. What came out for you in your breakout group? If anyone wants to share what came up, either in chat or.
Hi, I can go.
Sure.
The most interesting thing for me in the breakout group was that, it's like people like me who are into like sustainability and this and natural farming, ideologically and philosophically. For me, it's easy to imagine, and it makes perfect sense what Fukuoka is talking about. Um, so when Mr. Anand shared his thoughts in our group, and he's a farmer who is starting to experiment with these practices, I love that he said that everything that is there, while it seems really interesting, I'm also like, wow, this sounds really impossible and doesn't really compute. And that makes so much sense to me. Like when I look at it from the perspective of um, someone who just says that, oh, everything in the world should be better, but is not really doing anything towards it, like me, versus someone like Mr. Anand, who's really doing things, has been a farmer. And now when someone like him reads this, yeah, it's just two completely different perspectives, both hopeful but different.
Nice, thanks. So you got a practitioner's perspective. Thanks, Vikrant. Okay. Others on desires and on how looks of things, how the way things look and the shapes and sizes and things affect us. Share some reflections in the chat also. That will be nice to read as well. Maybe one or two people from each breakout group.
There is something I want to share what we have discussed in the group. I personally felt that it was a fast subject and a short time, but what came out of it was that where the desires are coming from, and how can we operate from scarcity to abundance. That is something.
Sure. Scarcity to abundance and finding abundance in what is rather than in the pursuit of more. And yeah, right. You're right, Siddharth. It's a vast topic and lifelong quest also. We will always be up against the challenge of time. I'll just add that there are many layers to what Fukuoka is saying here, because it is not only about how desires shape up things, but how they leave us with lack of time, how they make our lives busy and occupied, and so on. So I think it's several layers, goes several layers deep. Okay, let's hear one more share, maybe one or two more, including disagreements and tangential views are also welcome. So especially around development and other topics, I'm sure not all of us are on the same page. So welcoming all tangential views also. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So in our group, there were multiple points of views. One is that, how well educated are we about the sources of what we eat? Like, where do they come from? And what is the usual season? Is it out of season right now? So that was one. The other question raised was how practical is it to go local in the sense and go seasonal in the sense, like vegetables that come from a very different geography. Some of us are dependent on it due to our cuisine. So how practical is it? And the other was that we should try and use what is available close by in our bioregion. We also spoke about how our choices influence people up the supply chain.
Right.
If we ask for something bigger, of course, ultimately the farmer is going to get that message that, that's what is in demand. So,
yeah. Right. Yeah. Also, I think for me, the other one that it evokes is the idea of beauty itself. The beauty of when we start looking at artificial beauty, when we do that with foods, for example, the foods, the attitude that we do towards food starts moving into the attitude we have towards objects and even towards people, where we value a certain cosmetic beauty, and how valuing a certain cosmetic beauty is also then upstream. It's gonna create an entire industry that's just subject on propping up a lot of artificial beauty rather than enhancing natural beauty, and how there's a whole spectrum, a whole chain of things. And at the end of it, just like he says, there's no time in modern agriculture for a farmer to write a poem or compose a song. I would say there's no time in modern civilization either for us to write a poem or compose a song. So that is that. Tanveer mentioned that with breakouts, it's getting challenging to the flow, Tanveer, but I mean, the idea was not so much to make it a monologue, but to allow space for people to share, reflect, and so on. So maybe those who want to stay, what we could do is we could announce the breakouts, and then those who want to stay into the main room can continue in the main room, and we can also continue to have a conversation in the main room. So that lets people who want to break out choose to break out. Maybe that's an option. Only a handful of people then would be left. Yeah, we've got reflections from Rashmi here. Doing quickly hasn't led to anything of value. Swati, allowing imperfections, absolutely. And relying more on local produce, utopian thing. How can we inculcate this in an urban environment? Sure. So we'll leave these as open questions. So let's move to the next section. Let's not, I mean, the idea is not really to solve, but to really hold. So maybe let's go to the next slide. Anisha, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so we have a critique of fragmenting reality. I'm going to read a little more what Adil shared, and then we can look at the idea of how we break reality into pieces. So research wanders about aimlessly. Each research is just seeing one part of the infinite array of natural factors that affect harvest yield. So this is kind of classic modern civilization 101, where we're all stuck into our own narrow silos and really finding it hard to go beyond that. Right? So I'm going to read from this chapter called The Limits of Scientific Method. Before researchers become researchers, they should become philosophers. They should consider what the human goal is, what it is that humanity should create. Doctors should first determine at the fundamental level what is that human beings depend on for life. In applying my theories to farming, I have been experimenting in growing my crops in various ways, always with the idea of developing a method close to nature. I've done this by whittling away unnecessary agricultural practices. Very important in Fukuoka's approach is really asking, is it necessary, and moving away from there. Modern scientific agriculture, on the other hand, has no such vision. The research wanders about aimlessly, each researcher seeing just one part of the infinite array of natural factors which affect harvest yields. Furthermore, these natural factors change from place to place and from year to year. Even though it is the same quarter acre, the farmer must grow his crops differently each year in accordance to variations in weather, insect populations, the condition of the soil, and many other natural factors. Nature is everywhere in perpetual motion. Conditions are never exactly the same in any 2 years. Modern research divides nature into tiny pieces and conducts tests that confirm neither with natural law nor with practical experiences. The results are arranged for the convenience of research, not according to the needs of the farmer. To think that these conclusions can be put to use with invariable success in the farmer's field is a big mistake. Recently, Professor Tsuno of Eheim University wrote a lengthy book on the relationship of plant metabolism to rice harvest. This professor often comes to my field, digs down a few feet to check soil, brings students along to measure the angle of sunlight and shade and whatnot, and takes plant specimens back into his lab for analysis. I often ask him, when you go back, are you going to try non-cultivation direct seeding? He laughingly answers, no, I'll leave the applications to you. I'm going to stick with research. So that is how it is. You study the function of the plant's metabolism and its ability to absorb nutrients from the soil, write a book, and get a doctorate in agriculture science. But do not ask if your theory of assimilation is going to be relevant in the yield. Right? So just there are a couple of ideas there. The idea that each nature keeps changing, and so you cannot, even a natural farmer cannot just go by default and do the same thing all the time. It differs from plot to plot. It differs from season to season. You have to do different things. And just the idea that how research breaks everything down, and modern life is a lot about breaking things down to know them, right? So let's go to the next passage, which is also a critique of this way of knowing in fragments. So now we can go to the next slide. Anisha, next slide. Yeah, people understand things because of superficial knowledge. Let's see where this gets us. 154. People think that when they turn their eyes from the earth to the sky, they see heaven. They set the orange fruit apart from the green leaves and say they know green of the leaves from the orange and the orange of the fruit. But from the instant one makes a distinction between orange and green, the true colors vanish. People think they understand things because they become familiar with them. This is only superficial knowledge. It is the knowledge of the astronomer who knows the names of the stars, the botanist who knows the classification of the leaves and flowers, the artist who knows the aesthetics of green and red. This is not to know nature itself, the earth and sky, green and red. Astronomer, botanist, and artist have done no more than grasp impressions and interpret them, each within the vault of his own mind. The more involved they become with the activity of the intellect, the more they set themselves apart, and the more difficult it becomes to live naturally. The tragedy is that in their unfounded arrogance, people attempt to bend nature at their will. Human beings can destroy natural forms, but they cannot create them. Discrimination, a fragmented and incomplete understanding, always forms the starting point of human knowledge. We always begin with very limited, fragmented knowledge. Unable to know the whole of nature, people can do no better than to construct an incomplete model of it and then delude themselves into thinking that they have created something natural. So just the idea that intellect cannot be used to understand nature, which is too complex. All someone has to do to know nature is to realize that he doesn't really know anything and that he's unable to know anything. It can then be expected that he'll lose interest in discriminating knowledge. When he abandons discriminating knowledge, non-discriminating knowledge of itself arises within him. If he does not try to think about knowing, if he does not care about understanding, the time will come when he will understand. Right? This is an important. If he does not try to think about knowing, if he does not care about understanding, the time will come when he will understand. There is no other way than through the destruction of the ego, casting aside the thought that humans exist apart from heaven and earth. So there is no other way than to actually put this whole intellectual mind aside, that we're able to get something. This means being foolish instead of being smart. I snapped at the young fellow who had a wise look of complacency on his face. What kind of look is that in your eyes? Foolishness comes out of looking smart. Do you know for sure whether you are smart or foolish, or you are trying to become a foolish type smart guy? You can't become smart, can't become foolish, stuck at a standstill. Isn't that where you are now? Before I knew it, I was angry with myself for repeating the same words over and over again. Words which could never match the wisdom of remaining silent. Words I myself could not understand. The autumn sun was sinking low on the horizon. Twilight colors approached the foot of the old tree. Silent youth returned quietly to the huts for the evening meal. I followed quietly in the shadows. So there's the idea that intellectual knowledge is really not knowledge, it's just labels. Look at 166. Here now he's going a little more, we'll stay on the same slide, please, Anisha. Yeah. No need to do anything to the slides, I'll just let you know. How is it that people think science is beneficial to humanity? Now, this is a attack on science or a take on science. And this is a very powerful one, so please pay attention to this one. You'll love this one. Originally, grain was ground into flour in this village. जो grain है उसको आटा बनता था. Originally, grain was ground into flour in this village by a stone mill, which was turned slowly by hand, the chakki. Then a water mill, which had incomparably greater momentum than the old stone grinder, was built to utilize the power of the river current. So first it was hand mill, and then it became water, the river mill. Several years ago, a dam was constructed to produce hydroelectric power, and an electrically powered mill was built. How do you think this advanced machinery works for the benefit of human beings? In order to grind rice into flour, it is first polished, that is made into white rice. This means husking the grain, removing the germ and the barn, which are the basis of good health, and keeping the leftovers. And so, the result of technology is the breaking down of the whole grain into incomplete byproducts. If the too easily digestible white rice becomes the daily staple, the diet lacks nutrients and dietary supplements become necessary. So you need supplements because your food wasn't strong enough. And this sentence is quite powerful. The water wheel and the milling factory are doing the work of the stomach and intestines, and their consequence is to make these organs lazy. There's a beautiful link that Fukuoka makes. If the electric mill does the work of the stomach becomes lazy, the mill is doing the work, and that's not good with health. So it's the same with fuel. Crude oil is formed when the tissue of ancient plants buried deep in the earth is transformed by great pressure and heat. This substance is dug out of the desert, sent to port by pipeline, then transported by boat to Japan, then refined into kerosene and oil into big refinery. Right? And he says, why not just heat the home with twigs? Right? And now they're saying fossil fuels are not enough and that we need to develop atomic energy to surge the scarce uranium ore, compress it and burn it in huge nuclear furnaces, not as easy as burning dried leaves with a match. Right? Plus nuclear fire leaves radioactive waste and so on. So just the idea that in pursuing better and better, where we end up, I think that's kind of the real challenge. So we'll do a short breakout again. Let's do about 7 minutes now on this one. Just to share on these two things, on really fragmenting reality, on looking at knowledge, the intellect, looking at labels and this endless pursuit that we are into. So Adil, maybe can we do a 7-minute breakout then? Yeah.
Yeah, sure, Abhi. I'll just do that.
Yeah, so let's do some random breakouts and be back in 7 minutes. Yeah. So you can just say join the breakout room and we'll have a short one. So this one will go a little lesser. We're
Okay.
starting at 4:18, so 4:25 we close it.
All right, sounds good.
And then I'm going to give people an option, those who want to leave at 4:30, and then those who want to stay back for one more round of.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay, go ahead. Those who are here can also use this space to chat. That's also an option. Feel free. As and when you can. And yeah, let's go back to the presentation. So just a few final quotes I wanted to read before we close, and then I'll take in closing comments as well. So let's do a few final quotes and then go. But also wanted to hear when, Fukuoka's capacity to see long links between how externally when we start using power and energy, you are able to make your organs lazy. I think that was quite a profound link as well. Okay, let's go ahead. Nisha, you can go next. Sorry, back. Just one slide ahead. Yeah, next slide. Just one slide at a time, Anisha, if possible. Yeah, work. Let's stay there. Okay. So this is now last few thoughts on him. We come to his take on work. And by work, I think he has a very specific meaning. So this is what he's saying. I do not particularly like the word work. Human beings are the only animals who have to work. And I think this is the most ridiculous thing in the world. Other animals make their livings by living, but people work like crazy thinking they have to in order to stay alive. The bigger the job, the greater the challenge, the more wonderful they think it is. It would be good to give up that way of thinking and to live an easy, comfortable life with plenty of free time. So obviously Fukuoka is not one of those people who's like hustler, go out, achieve, but really looking at a spiritual life, comfortable, easy life with plenty of free time. I think that the way animals live in the tropics, stepping outside in the morning and evening to see if there is something to eat and taking a long nap in the afternoon must be a wonderful life. For human beings, a life of such simplicity would be possible if one worked to produce directly his daily necessities. In such a life, work is not work as people generally think of it, but simply doing what needs to be done. To move things in this direction is my goal. It is also the goal of the people who live communally here. Okay, so I think this is the first thought here, which is really to talk about how, and again, this is a view, right? But just really saying that if we only meet our needs then we are able to really live a easier life. And it's a reflection on how much we are living out of our needs and desires. Okay, next slide. Anisha, we can go to one slide, just one slide next. Yeah. Yeah, farm would be worried. Atul, you have something to ask or share?
Oh, sorry, that was raised by mistake. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay, no problem. Okay, so last few things that I wanted to share. Again, continuing Fukuoka's take on work, he's saying that there is no one as great as the one who doesn't try to accomplish nothing, right? To think that one who is smart and can look out for himself is exceptional, and that it's better to be exceptional, is to follow adult values. The one who goes about his own business, eats and sleeps well, the one with nothing to worry about, would seem to me to be living in the most satisfactory manner. There is no one so great as the one who does not try to accomplish anything. This is the Fukuoka philosophy, not trying to get to anywhere, not trying to do anything, really. And yeah, Auroville, I think Krishna is also in Solitude Farms doing some of these experiments. And yeah, the last originally, no, don't change the slide. Yeah, just stay there. Originally, human beings had no purpose. Now, dreaming up some purpose or the other, they struggle away trying to find meaning of life. It is a one-man wrestling match. There's no purpose one has to think about or go out in search of. You would do well to ask the children whether or not a life without purpose is meaningless. From time to time they enter nursery school, people's sorrows begin. From the time they enter nursery school, people's sorrows begin. The human being was a happy creature, but he created a hard world and now struggles trying to break out of it. In nature, there is life and death. Nature is joyful. In human society, there is life and death, and people live in sorrow. Right? So I think just this closing reflection about how much we have created struggle for ourselves in trying to accomplish. And in any endeavor, it's worth looking at how we create work for ourselves and how a restless mind is really hell bent on creating things. Right? So I think these were some of the quotes that I wanted to talk about. You can go to the next slide there, Anisha. So just want to pause now. We'll not go into breakout groups for this one, but just these questions of what do these readings evoke? Where do you see alignment and gap? Which ideas resonate? So I'm just going to open the space now up for general conversation and Q&A. We can go, I mean, I'll let these questions stay, Anisha, I think. This is also opening it up for, opening the space up for any comments, question, answers, any responses. I can see the chat is also active. So yeah, next time we should do this meeting on a farm for a whole day. Yeah. Okay, let's hear some reflections, and this is also, let's use this open space for Q&A also before we check out. So just this idea, any thoughts on the idea of work and us creating work, and the value of actually what's wrong with living peacefully, living simply. Does that resonate? Is there alignment? Does it for some of you go against what you believe in? Okay, so Tanveer has something to say. We can all look at the chat there. Right. So yeah, sure, Tanveer. Thanks for sharing that. Any others? Other thoughts? Other comments? Other reflections? Any ideas that resonate? Any ideas that don't? Okay,
I have
lovely. Yeah.
something. Okay, I'm not sure what this is, but I was just thinking about the last quote that was there in the slide about how we're always looking for meaning, even though that isn't necessarily any meaning to anything. It's just what we put to it. But if we go ahead with that framework, would it kind of put us behind in trying to understand things around us? And I mean, there's nothing wrong with just being and just existing with things around you, but does that have some drawbacks in terms of understanding the world around us better? Just something I was thinking about. I'm not sure if.
Yeah. So if we do nothing, then do we not even then bother about understanding the world around us? Sure. I think Kinjal also has a good reflection on if Buddha would not bother about enlightenment, then what would happen? Sure. Okay. Nice reflection, Aziza. Yeah, I think broadly just good for each of us to think about doing too much and how does doing too much affect us. In my own approach to social change and social work itself also, I have really tried to ask myself, how much of social change is even necessary? And are we overdoing it? Is this all the restless mind? Or is this really necessary? And like Anish said, I think that kind of captures it. Is it acting out of stillness or is it acting out of restlessness, right? And yeah, if each of us is able to live this way, definitely be in a much better place to live. So on that note, let's just move the slide. Anisha, let's just see what do we have here. Okay, maybe I'll do one spontaneous reading, not knowing what we're going to read. Another thing, what to say, work for stubbornness with intellect. Sure. Okay, so spontaneous reading. This is the ones who live peacefully in a world of no contradictions and no distinctions are infants. They perceive light and dark, strong and weak, but make no judgment. Even though the snake and the frog exist, the child has no understanding of the strong and the weak. The original joy of life is there, but the fear of death is yet to appear. The love and hate which arise in the adult's eyes originally were not two separate things. They were the same thing as seen from front and from back. Love gives substance to hate. If you turn the coin of love over, it becomes hate. Only by penetrating to an absolute world of no aspects is it possible to avoid becoming lost in the duality of the phenomenal world. People distinguish between the self and the other. To the extent that the ego exists, to the extent that there is another, people will not be relieved from love and hatred. The heart that loves the wicked ego creates the hatred enemy. For humans, the first and the greatest enemy is the self that they hold so dear. Okay, that's a nice note to wrap this up on. This is the fact that our ego causes duality. Our ego brings a lot of these kind of issues for us. Let's go to the next slide. So if you have any question answers, you can definitely type into the chat box. But I want to close with one of his most famous quotes: "The ultimate goal of farming is not growing of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings." The idea that whatever we do, the intent is not the act itself, but really purification of ourselves as a channel. Fukuoka found it through farming. Some of you may find it through acting or writing, or whatever each of us finds through. But the idea is not the act itself, but really cultivation of ourselves. And I think that's a beautiful message from Fukuoka that we can all take. Yeah, it is so Gandhi. So wish all of you read this book and are also beneficiaries of some of this. And thank you for showing up for the webinar. Please share your chat box responses in the chat box. And thanks a lot. Thank you, Adil. And back over to you, Anisha, to close this.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. While we are sharing the thoughts that really stayed with us, I will just leave you with a tune. Kabir is something that Abhishek has been really inspired by, and I'm going to hum a few lines from a very popular song. La 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 जरा हल्के गाड़ी हाको मेरे राम गाड़ी वाले जरा होले होले गाड़ी हाको मेरे राम गाड़ी वाले गाड़ी मारे रंग बिरंगी पहिया लाल गुलाल गाड़ी मारे रंग बिरंगी पहिया लाल गुलाल हकन वाली चाल चबेली बैठे वाला राम हर हर जरा हल्के गाड़ी हाको मेरे राम गाड़ी वाले जरा होले होले गाड़ी हाको मेरे राम गाड़ी वाले. Thank you so much, Abhishek, for joining us for this session. It's lovely seeing a lot of the familiar and continued participants, and please do join us for the future webinars. Adil will be joining. Yeah, Adil has shared the next webinar is on Wednesday at 3 p.m. and the details are also available on the Bhumi Facebook page. It's about the role of education in this emergent times. It'd be lovely to have you all with us. Please feel free to leave your thoughts in the chat box.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Right.
Thanks,
Thank
Abhishek.
you.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining. But you can't say bye, goodbye, Abhishek, because if you've read the book, you'll see that Fukuoka says, don't say goodbye. To part is just to part. So on that note, let's just part and see you all soon.
See you.
See you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. The next webinar is on Wednesday at 3 p.m. Like I mentioned, it's on the role of education in these emergent times. So you can join in. That could be a very interesting webinar as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for connecting. Thanks for organizing. And in case of need, do we have any the directory sort of or the participants' numbers available?
I'm not sure whether we'll have to take consent from all the participants before they share their mail IDs, right?
The reason why I'm asking is during the personal chat in the room, there were few talk and some of the answers. If then it's okay, or otherwise I can display my number and the person who is concerned, he or she can connect to me, right?
Yeah, I think you can do that.
Anyway,
That would be.
we'll see you in the next week. That's perfect. All right, I am sharing my number on. Bye, sir.
Yes, please go ahead.